Welcome to Insights for Manufacturing, the podcast that supports the UK manufacturing sector. Hosted by Jeff Beecham, the manufacturer's recruiter. Hello and welcome to Insights for Manufacturing. I'm delighted to welcome my guest today, Andrew Large, who is the Director General at the Confederation of Paper Industries. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Glad to be here.
You're very welcome. This is quite an interesting topic. You know, paper and cardboard, part of, UK manufacturing. I spent a bit of my career very early on for working for a printing ink manufacturer. So I understand a little bit about substrates, paper, corrugated, packaging and all that sort of stuff. So I was really keen for us to have this discussion. So firstly, Andrew, how important is paper and cardboard these days?
Well, it's hugely important. Let's just go back to the pandemic. Think about the things that were important to us during the pandemic. Think about the news items on toilet roll and empty shelves on supermarkets.
Yeah.
Think about how important food deliveries were and online deliveries. Think about the fact that the government wrote to everybody on paper about the measures that they were taking in response to the pandemic. Think about all of the use of food packaging materials for supermarkets. Paper's hugely important, and sometimes we're a bit blind to it because it's around us everywhere. But actually, not only is it completely ubiquitous, and without it, normal life as we know it would fall apart. But it's also still a huge industry. There are 47 paper mills in the UK, turns over around 12 billion pounds a year, employs 60 odd thousand people directly, another 100,000 indirectly supported. That employment is spread widely across the United Kingdom. So it's a hugely important, hugely essential industry. And I think what's interesting is it's an industry that's in a period of change. It's fair to say that since the year 2000, there's been some decline. That's largely been driven by getting out of graphic papers. You imagine how much we use online now as opposed to magazines, copier paper, newsprint, and whatever. But then as an industry, we've moved very much into packaging papers, very much into tissue. And although we've gone through a little bit of a low point, actually, if you look at the investments that have been publicly announced, there's a new paper centre being built in North Wales, which is going to make packaging papers and tissue. There's another new tissue mill going to be built in Goole in Yorkshire. There's a real uptick, and actually the growth and the future for the coming years for paper is hugely, hugely interesting.
Yeah. Well, as you say, we can't do without it. So, okay. Well, in terms of the CPI, do you just want to give a brief overview to our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, sure.
What are the objectives of the organisation, and what sort of businesses make up your membership?
Yeah, sure. So CPI's got a long history. The original ancestor organisation, so the Paper and Board Association of Great Britain and Ireland, was established in 1872. So we're effectively 151 years old. The Confederation has been in its current form for about 20 years. And what it does is it brings together the paper makers. So we have 100% of volume paper making in membership, converters of packaging. We have about 85% by volume of packaging conversion, and then a similar percentage of tissue manufacturing. But then also it brings together the businesses that are involved in the recycling of paper. So we're very much sort of trees to recycling bins and all points in between. So the sort of businesses, there are household names like DS Smith and Smurfit Kappa that are FTSE 100 companies. We have the Kimberly Clarks, the Essities, the Sofidel, so the people whose products you would see in the supermarkets. And then we have a wide range of businesses of varying different sizes. The common thread through all of them is they're involved directly in the manufacturing or conversion of paper and paper products. And that's really where our core and majority membership is. So what do we do for them? Well, we provide a lot of information and support, translating government regulation, legislation into practical guidance, acting as a liaison to make sure that we have members doing the right things at the right times in order to be compliant with the law. We provide some direct services, particularly on managing climate change agreements and UK ETS participation. Yeah, we engage with government to look to improve the regulatory environment where we can. We have a great focus on health and safety, on making sure that the industry is as safe as it can be. Through what we call the PABIAC, the Paper and Board Industry Advisory Committee strategy process, we've made huge strides over the last 20 years in making the industry safer. In fact, I think it's fair to say it's as safe today as it ever has been. And yeah, we're also really there as the sort of the focal point, hub, the network. We have a convening power to bring the industry together to solve problems. Obviously, within the scope of competition law, that's hugely important to make sure we comply with that. But we're very much about bringing the industry together to look at the key issues for that industrial competitiveness, and then making sure that the businesses within the industry are able to be as competitive as they can be.
Brilliant, and it's nice to know that there's such a a sort of long-standing heritage for the Confederation in its previous guises. So you spoke about environmental, everywhere you look these days, the words net zero, carbon neutral, sustainability are there in front of us. So in terms of the paper industry, how are your members, or how is the industry in general adapting or continuing to adapt to sort of eco-friendly practices? Has technology moved on much over the last sort of 5, 10, 20 years in terms of the processes given sustainability?
I mean, there's a lot of different aspects to this. So the first is the actual paper making process itself. Then I want to look a little bit about packaging. Then I want to look a little bit about sort of wider sort of material substitution issues. So yeah, the paper making process itself is actually quite stable. The suspension of cellulose fibers in water and then casting them out to form a sheet is a process that people from 100 years ago would recognize. That said, there's been a tremendous amount of incremental innovation in product lightweighting, in energy efficiency, fuel switching. So, getting away from coal towards, gas, CHP as being the way in which a paper mill is powered, and then going beyond that. So looking at electrification, we had a major announcement today. For example, one of our paper mills is now looking at hydrogen as a fuel source for some of its activities. So there's been a tremendous amount of work being done in and amongst the existing process to look at how we can make it as efficient and as energy efficient as we can, and making sure that we're getting away from high carbon sources of energy to low carbon sources of energy. One of the great qualities of the paper making process is that we don't use carbon as a reagent anywhere in the process. We're only interested in steam at a certain temperature and pressure, and effectively motive power to move the motors. And if we've got both of those, and they're reliable and they're cost effective, we are utterly agnostic as to where it comes from. So nuclear power station, coal-fired power station, wind farm, batteries, whatever,
doesn't matter.
We are completely and totally happy for those products to come from whatever source they come from. So I'm very, very pleased about that. I think that's very, very important. What I would say is, moving on then to the packaging side of things, obviously it's hugely important that the goods that our members are, the economy is producing, are properly packaged. So we do a lot of work to make sure that the packaging is actually performing in use, because there's absolutely no benefit to having a packaging material which then doesn't protect the goods that you're shipping. And you end up with what I call the triple journey problem. So if you break something in transit, you have the original order, which is going to be rejected because you've broken it. You then have the return. So you have the second order, you've got to give it back. And then you have the third order to actually re-satisfy the original order that was required. So for one faulty piece of packaging, you end up with 3 journeys, which is no good at all for any kind of environmental sustainability, carbon emissions, or whatever you like. So we need to make sure that the materials that we use are actually functioning in use, and an awful lot of work goes in the packaging side to innovate packaging design, to minimize material use, to maximize recyclability, and to maximize the protection from the product so that you minimize the triple journey problem. Also on the packaging side, we've done a lot of work on our packaging recyclability guidelines, and also on a new initiative called Paper Cycle, which we can come on to a bit later. And they are both very practical attempts to guide the design of packaging, and then also to fully assess its recyclability so that we can use those fibers as often as we possibly can going forward.
Yeah.
The one other area I want to talk about carbonisation in particular, decarbonisation, is material substitution. Because obviously in the packaging field, paper and paper-based products are competing with plastics.
Yep.
Now, I'm not going to be dogmatic about this and say that paper is always better than plastic. I don't think the plastic people should say that plastic is always better than paper. But as we're looking to not just performance in use, but also overall sustainability and end of life for the material, with the well understood pre-existing recycling loops for fiber-based products, we think that fiber is competitive as a substitute in many areas for fossil oil-based plastic products.
Okay.
And so we see very much that one of the contributions we can make to industrial decarbonisation is about reducing the demand for oil for plastics.
Yep.
It's not everybody, it's not everywhere. Plastic is a fantastic material. I'm not going to criticise it in any way, shape or form, but it's a material of a certain time. And now we're looking more about environmental sustainability. We're not looking about cradle to grave. We're looking about a constant circularity of materials.
Right. Yep.
The renewability and reusability and recyclability of fiber-based products starting to come to the fore. And, we are, for things like, for example, fruit and veg trays, for things like the sliding inserts that you have in packaging, which are often plastic that have got things pressed into them. We see fiber-based products as being very competitive with those. And, we're very, very keen that we can play our role in decarbonisation by offering a more sustainable alternative.
Super. And there's, I guess it's, whether it's paper, whether it's plastic, quite divisive topics really, aren't they? Depending on which camp Joe Public is, or, people in government or wherever it might be. You can't please everybody. There's no point even trying. Personally, I see the use for both. Plastic, we need it, but I'm also a big fan of paper stuff as well. We can't, I don't think we can survive without paper. I mean, I was thinking about this earlier before we came online, and I was sat there thinking, okay, so a lot of businesses, with my business here, years ago, as a recruiter, you'd have loads of CVs, you'd print them off, you'd sort of scribble notes on them and all that sort of thing. Now, pretty much it's paperless, apart from my little notepad. I make notes and it goes straight into the computer system. But if we did end up in a situation where there was no paper, it's never going to happen, but just imagine there was no paper for communicating, and everything's gone totally digital, and then some foreign country decides to let off a burst of EMP over our atmosphere and everything just stops. What would we do then? So that's just my, from an outsider looking in, there's one of the risks of going too far down the let's get rid of paper. I don't think we should anyway. I still love a book and a trade magazine.
Jeff, what you just said, I mean, not in quite such an aggressive way, but the British Library is still, I believe, the victim of a cyber attack. It's been reported in the news. Their whole digital catalogue has been taken down. So their ability, therefore, to find volumes on the shelves has gone down because they don't have any more the manual records of where their books are. And so PhD students and academics are having to travel to other places other than the British Library. And as people say flippantly, you can't hack paper. Now, you and I are speaking through the digital world. You are, it gives us so much, and I'm not for one moment going to advocate a return to a pre-digital world. but it brings its risks.
Yeah.
And I think as part of a corporate risk management strategy, and you don't even need to think about sort of enemy action. You just need to think about power cuts. You just
Absolutely.
need to think about flooding events leading to power outages. You just need to think about accidental corruption of data
Yeah.
on systems, and having that paper record backup is going to be incredibly important in that kind of incident resilience. And I think businesses really do need to look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. So packaging then, especially paper and cardboard, plays a crucial role in manufacturing.
Mhm.
So what are the main environmental challenges then associated with paper and cardboard
Mm.
packaging in manufacturing? And what's the Confederation and its members doing to address these
Yeah.
issues?
I mean, I think the thinking of fiber-based packaging as a discrete unit in itself, the issue is really around recycling. It's what do you do with the packaging when it's when it's finished with.
Yeah.
And as an organization, we've looked really at two principal initiatives. The first is, can we influence how packaging is designed? So it's not just designed to be performing in use, it's also designed to be very easily recyclable afterwards.
Sure.
And we've developed over the last 4 years a series of packaging guidelines. So they're aimed at designers, they're aimed at being future facing, and we're giving some narrative based on our experience of actually receiving material into paper mills and then looking to recycle it through the paper mill production process on effectively what works and what doesn't. So, and what we're asking for designers is, as they're building the next generation of packaging formats, can they do a bit more of what works and a bit less of what doesn't? So, whether these are, use of plastics and laminates, whether this is overuse of wet strength additives to the paper recipe, whether this is various kinds of inks, varnishes, coatings, foilings, whatever, can they be done with recycling in mind so they do not become a damage to the recycling process?
Yeah.
And those guidelines are impressionistic. We set some sort of targets. So, we're looking at gradually reducing the level of what we would call contaminants in the paper recipe down to below 5%. We're not there yet, but we're looking to continue to engage with and encourage designers to drive that forwards. And then conversely, because all of policy and people's ESG commitments and government's extended producer responsibility and so on is actually looking at putting some binary labels on things. Yes, no, can you recycle it? Can it not?
Right.
We've started developing, and indeed we've launched in May this year, a new initiative called Paper Cycle. And basically what Paper Cycle does is, if you have a packaging format, you can go down an online test, and if the result of that is it comes out as being recyclable, we take a certain proportion of those, to about 10%, and we test them just to make sure that the system is running correctly and people aren't taking advantage. But if it comes out of the bottom and says it isn't recyclable on the basis of the online test, then you can come and physically test it anyway. And that physical test, then basically it involves simulating the paper making process with the product that you've put together, looking at how much coarse rejects there are, looking at the quality of the finished sheet. Are there flecks of old ink in it? Are there flecks of glitter and foil? Are there what we call macro stickies? There might be some adhesive in there that you're using to stick the box together. It sort of liquefies in the production process and then re-solidifies back into the paper and becomes a quality fault. So we're testing for all of those things, and if it passes the test, then we will certify it as being recyclable in UK paper mills. And this is a new initiative. I have to say, from a standing start, we're growing quite quickly. There's a lot of interest, particularly from big companies who, as part of their packaging product development cycle, they want to have a test to see whether it's recyclable or not. And it's a real practical service that a trade association can provide in support of its members to demonstrate that the products that they are that are being placed on the market are actually recyclable. So we're not just saying, oh, it's recyclable. We can actually point to the paper mill, we can point to the test of the product, and we can say, look, here's what's happening, and we can prove it.
Yeah. And are those testing facilities your own, or are they within member companies, or have you got a separate sort of testing body, or how does that work?
We have separate contracts with a couple of independent testing bodies.
Right.
It's important. We couldn't do this in a member company. There would just be conflicts of interest everywhere.
Yeah.
So we have a separate contract with an independent third-party test house, and they are providing us. They're doing the tests in accordance with a European paper testing methodology, which has been agreed by the European level trade association and a European level initiative called for Evergreen.
Okay.
And then, so the test is a common European test. Packaging will get tested in the same way in most European countries. And then the interpretative criteria for the results of that test, they are UK specific, taken into account, particularly UK legislative, packaging, recycling, recovery processes, and so on and so forth. So you can't have the same interpretative criteria in different countries because the quality of the input materials is different, the way they're collected is different. So we need to make sure that the interpretative criteria matches not just the test, but also the real world collection system that is going on underneath the test.
Yeah. What about sort of regulations and things like that? I mean, the law seems to change every now and again, no matter what industry you're in, usually for the right reasons, but not always. In terms of the paper industry, are there any sort of upcoming changes or new regulations that sort of might impact UK paper making? What's the sort of state of play in terms of the regs?
There are an enormous number, and frankly, Jeff, it's probably easier to talk about the areas where there aren't things coming forward other than where there are.
Yeah.
But just to give you a flavour and a case in point, so we've literally just seen the continuation of the climate change agreement system for another 10 years.
Okay.
So the climate change agreements will continue to be in effect until 2033, and that's given an area of stability. But there's been a long run up in terms of the consultation and the considerations for that. Obviously, we've just had UK emissions trading system being set up post Brexit, and we are now very much looking at the development of that. What's going to happen to free allowances? What's the trajectory for them being withdrawn? How might that fit in with an eventual UK carbon border adjustment mechanism, where you'd effectively apply a carbon tax on imported products to equalise the carbon charges across borders? So there's a tremendous amount going on there. On the packaging side, we're in the middle of the biggest upheaval of packaging recycling law for a generation. So you might recall the introduction of PRNs. Well, they are now being superseded, at least in some areas, by extended producer responsibility, which is looking to put the whole cost of curbside recycling collection on businesses. And there's a lot of work going on now to just understand what's the methodology, how is that going to apply in certain contexts, what are the issues that are being brought up from that. Then on forestry issues, we have, now that the UK is outside the EU, we're becoming a third country importer or potentially third country purchaser from the European Union of pulp or paper or other products, and then we have to deal with the new EU deforestation regulations. And how can we demonstrate, for example, that fibre-based products being exported from the UK to the EU are free from the products of deforestation? And there's a whole piece of work now to be done to see how do we comply with that new piece of legislation. What are the challenges? And this is, because of the particular situation of Northern Ireland, and also the particular situation of the Republic of Ireland, as it happens, the Republic of Ireland has no paper mills, so all the primary production of paper has to occur somewhere else. A lot
Yeah.
of it historically occurs in the UK. So the export of paper products to the EU is a not insignificant issue. Not just the island of Ireland, but also other EU countries as well. And so our compliance with these things, which historically was effectively a given because they were incorporated into UK law,
Yeah.
increasingly as we are longer away from the European Union, then the laws inevitably begin to diverge as new laws are passed in one jurisdiction or another and are not precisely mirrored. And so the compliance issue just multiplies, and there's more and more work to do to understand what's required and then understand how we comply with it.
So quite a few, let's call them challenges, headwinds. It's quite a complex landscape, isn't it, really? But I mean, there must be some opportunities for the paper industry as well. What are you seeing? Any sort of trends or any opportunities for innovation, or let's flip it onto a a positive. We all need paper. What's the future going to be? What's technically in the pipeline in terms of an industry?
I look at it in two ways. I think the UK paper industry and the downstream products are enormously good at innovating to meet and lead customer demand. So I see the continued delivery of not just manufactured products, but sort of whole, effectively sort of product protection services. Okay. So you're effectively selling packaging not just as I need you to buy 100,000 cardboard boxes, but we're selling effectively the service of getting your product from A to B in the most sustainable way possible with the least amount of damage to it.
Yeah.
And I think the opportunities for innovation in that area, for improving the design of packaging, improving its ability to protect the product, to promote it, to pack it securely. I think that's hugely optimistic. The other area I think which is very optimistic is the continued sort of growth of hygiene. We look at where we are with our health service at the moment. We look at where we are with the demands for healthcare and the demands. The pandemic has, I think, taught us a lot about the importance of how you manage infectious diseases and so on. And I do think that there's a lot of opportunities there for greater sales of tissue, to literally, as the government's promotional posters say, catch it, bin it, kill it. Where we are becoming much more acutely aware of the importance of managing infectious disease, and COVID was a particular case in point. But every year there is colds, there are flu and norovirus and all of these things. So as we become much more aware of the impacts we can have with personal hygiene, then I think the various tissue products that are able to quite literally catch it, bin it, kill it are I think going to play a greater and greater role, and I think there's huge opportunities there too.
And I think it's worth noting that certainly from my point of view, we can't afford not to have that manufacturing facility in the UK, can we? We don't want to be, importing the bulk of our tissue paper, do we? We've got to have that here, surely.
Well, I think there's always a tightrope here, because on the one hand, there are quite clearly advantages to free trade and advantages to the exploitation of comparative advantage.
Yes.
But again, we don't want to create a sort of an autarkic state where we have to have absolutely everything done for ourselves. I think there's only one country in the world that's doing that, which is North Korea. And with due respect to the North Koreans, that's not an example I think that any of us would want to follow.
Absolutely.
We are. That said, we also clearly have, and again, these are lessons learned from the pandemic, that the first thing that happened when there were supply chain crises was that governments pulled the export shutters down. So material could not leave.
Yeah.
And you might recall, negotiations taking place on airport tarmacs, as cargo planes were loaded with PPE. Literally, the highest bidder was coming to buy the load before it took off and flew somewhere.
Yeah.
And so, in Europe, for example, they've got the concept of strategic autonomy, which is an attempt to have a made in Europe strategy. When I say Europe, I mean the EU. It's the EU 27 at the moment.
Yeah.
For example, the UK Labour Party is starting to talk about securonomics, so economics, but with a security angle to it.
Mm-hmm.
The United States has always been a bit more autarkic than other nations, even though it's also a big importer of manufactured goods as well. So I think for every country, there is now a sense that the balance point has shifted, and that whereas previously people felt they could rely upon free trade, there'd always be a willing seller. And the price might vary, but there'd always be a willing seller. I think people are having to get to grips with the fact that in the real world, sometimes there might not be a willing seller, or the willing seller might be prevented from selling by their government. And on that basis, people do need to make sure that they've got the ability that, the wheels don't fall off your society the minute that you don't suddenly have a willing seller for goods that you desperately need.
Yeah. So it's really important that we're not necessarily 100% self-efficient, but self-sufficient rather, but we need to make sure that we can make our own. And that brings me on to another question that we hadn't sort of planned for, I guess, but that's around skills. I mean, there's 60 odd thousand people in the paper sector in the UK. So how big an issue is skills in the paper manufacturing sector? Because across the bulk of the rest of the manufacturing sector, most companies are struggling to get all sorts of labor, whether it's unskilled, skilled engineers. It's a huge issue. There's a huge skills gap. How's that sort of affecting your members then?
Oh, I think the first thing to say is that we're no better or no worse than many, many other manufacturing sectors.
Okay.
We have an aging workforce. We have challenges in recruiting people to come and work in lots of different parts across the industry. I think the first thing we have to do as an industry, which we've already started through a campaign called Beyond the Box, and some work that we've been doing to take cardboard as a material and its uses into schools, is that we've got to start building the impression that it's a good product. It does what it's supposed to do, but it does so in a way that doesn't damage the environment, and it's somewhere that you can feel proud of and be proud of being associated of. So we've started to do some work in trying to move the needle in terms of what people actually think of us.
Okay.
The second thing, I think more practically, is we're now in the second year of an apprenticeship program, where we've worked together with Cogent Skills and with the Institute for Apprenticeships to put together an apprenticeship program, currently targeted just on papermaking, but with the ambition in forthcoming years to broaden that out to provide an apprenticeship route of entry for papermaking, for packaging, for recycling, and possibly for other areas as well. So we're actually trying to help our members engage in the recruitment market more directly and put more skilled people together. The other thing I would say, though, is that the skills you need are changing, and this is a big area of work for us, is actually understanding not just what did you need 15 years ago, what do you need now, but what will you need. And it's clear that we're going to need people with skills in digital process control. We're going to need people with skills in flexible energy management. We're going to need people with skills in product design and marketing to be able to compete with other materials that will also be doing the same thing and will also be trying to push their solution to packaging challenges. And so we're not just anymore an industry full of people who have got machine minding jobs, who are with large spanners and drills and manually adjusting pieces of equipment and so on. What we need are people with the AI skills to be able to run a process control system, to use AI to determine that a certain end effect visible in the paper is likely to be as a result of a certain precursor effect, then to get the maintenance scheduled, and then to automate all of that I
Yeah.
mean, even now, machines, across the industry are talking directly through, internet links with their manufacturers.
Yeah.
They're on a 24/7 rolling, hundreds, thousands of data points a second being recorded. And as soon as, the bearing on number three roll may be approaching the end of its life, and the people who are monitoring it 24/7 will know long before you can see anything in the paper, long
Yeah.
before you can hear anything or notice anything. And you can do therefore proactive maintenance, which keeps your uptime up, keeps your productivity up, and really makes the industry as productive as it can be. And so that's a sort of very long-winded way of saying that the skills needs are really going to change.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure, and we're starting the process through our apprenticeships, of making sure that we can actually recruit the people that we're going to need, in the next 10 to 20 years, who are going to come into the industry, bring the new skills in with them, and then grow with those skills through the industry as it goes forward.
Yeah. I suppose a lot of people that aren't in the paper industry, might see it as a traditional or a long-standing, old-fashioned sector, but it's not really, is it? You've just been talking about a plant and machinery that's connected up. We've got Industry 4,
Yeah.
Internet of Things, IoT. You've just been talking about AI. Some of that is already in place, but it's changing all the time. And I think that's probably a good hook, if you like, to get more youngsters interested in, I mean, I don't know anybody that's sort of talked about or considered going into the papermaking industry. You got to be in the right pockets to come across those sort of people. But that's just another example of a part of UK manufacturing that needs a constant supply of youngsters coming into industry, and things change every couple of years, especially with things like AI technology. Somebody who's learning stuff at college at the moment, in another 5 years, they're going to need to upgrade and get a different set of skills. So it's not an industry that's set in its ways by any stretch of the imagination, is it? You've got to move with the times, materials, processing. Yeah.
No, not at all, Jeff. I mean, I think if I was going to take this opportunity to be slightly critical of government, I think government has had an awful lot on its plate over the last 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of help and support, particularly from the business department over time.
Yeah.
One area where I would encourage them to look at, though, and they've recently produced a report on advanced manufacturing, to which we're going to produce a response. There is a tendency to think of wings, wheels, and silicon chips, and if it isn't got one of those, then there's less of an interest.
Yeah.
And I certainly want to encourage government to think more broadly about what is advanced manufacturing. Because as I hope people will realize, you can't go a day in your life without being dependent upon a paper product somewhere. And yet those products are made in the UK at extraordinarily high levels of productivity, the very latest technologically advanced equipment, AI enabled, Internet of Things, and whether it's tissue, whether it's packaging, whether it's hand towels for washrooms or whatever. Those products, while they might seem quite prosaic in people's hands, they're actually performing the most incredible function for us, and they're produced in the most interesting way, and they are sustainable into the long term because they're renewable and they're recyclable going forwards. And I just think that there's a huge opportunity there for government to expand the advanced manufacturing concept, to recognize that it's not just in inverted commas sexy things, but actually it's there's a whole wide range of opportunities there that people can have to have interesting, fulfilling, worthwhile, massively contributing to British society careers. And we would just like to open that door a bit wider and make sure we can get in.
I'm fully supportive of that, 100%. Well, Andrew, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you this afternoon. It's been a while in the making. I do as many of these podcasts as my work schedule allows. It's always interesting to get a different angle on UK manufacturing, a different part of the sector. I've found our chat this afternoon extremely insightful. So thanks very much again for coming on. Hope the listeners and viewers have enjoyed the show. Anybody needs any information about the UK paper industry, get in contact with the Confederation of Paper Industries. So thanks again to Andrew Large. Thank you for listening, and look out for the next episode of Insights for Manufacturing. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.